Greetings and salutations, folks. My name is Nick, and welcome to a short analysis of Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. I admit I'm not much of a historian, so I'm probably not going to go very much in depth to the history of the work, the history of the man whose middle name I cannot pronounce. My focus is going to be more on the text itself, so if you're more into literary theory, this could be closer to the death of the author, which, if you are not aware of literary theory, death of the author does not mean the literal death of the author. It's the figurative death. It is the removal of the author from the text as a means of analysis. And that's what I'm going to focus more of my time on, because it is easier to give my opinion than do research. But the text does well enough to speak for itself. We're going to dive into a little bit about the author afterwards, because there is some interesting things to look at there. But first, let us, at the very least, listen to a reading of the poem. It's short enough that we can have that. There's also going to be a full text of the poem in the description as well, so you can follow along. So, here we go. Ozymandias. Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. I met a traveler from an antique land, who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. No thing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. All right, that was the poem itself. What do you think? I like it. I admit, despite my English literature background, I don't think I really was aware of the poem until after reading Watchmen by Alan Moore. But it is one of my favorites. But let's talk about it a little bit. And I think one of the first things that I want to talk about is the main character of the poem, the I. It's not I traveled to an antique land. I met a traveler from an antique land. The I in the storyline is relatively unnecessary to the telling of the story of the poem. We don't need that person because they never come into the tale at all. Besides that opening set fragment that just says, I met a traveler. That I provides no opinions. They say nothing in regards to the statue. But I find it interesting because essentially it just adds to how remote the statue of Ozymandias is. It's also worth noting, and I'm going to get into this later after we start talking a little bit about Percy Shelley, just a little bit, that is also probably how Shelley experienced the statue of the young Memnon, or Ramses II, as somebody who had met a traveler who had gone to, for what Shelley would have considered an antique land, that being Egypt, early 19th century era. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. We're sticking with, at the very least, you've got your narrator who's telling the tale is so remote from this land that it is being presented as beyond civilization. Met a traveler from an antique land. Met a traveler from a place that civilization does not thrive. Though you could say, again, I'm getting farther ahead of it myself here, the perception of Egypt in the early 1800s. We'll skip ahead to the statue. So in the dialogue of the statue, we've got two characters that show up. There's the builder of the statue, and then there's the Ozymandias himself. The traveler doesn't do anything but see the statue and recite the facts of what he saw. And he sees this statue built, let's see, with wrinkled lip and a sneer of cold command. Not necessarily a friendly face, possibly a fearful ruler. And the creator wanted to capture that. But then again, who would have commissioned the statue if not Ozymandias himself? There's the look of the statue, the sneer of cold command could be how Ozymandias wanted to be interpreted by the people who saw the statue. Anybody who would say things like, "I am the king of kings, look how mighty my works are," and despair upon them, is probably not going to be greeting strangers coming to his land with a big smile on his face. What I also find interesting is the idea of not only the idea that all of his works are simply gone, eroded through time, where the knowledge of what things were could easily be lost. Now let's talk briefly about Percy Shelley. Just a little bit. Alright, Percy Shelley. Born in the late 1700s in 1792, died in 1822 at the age of 29 in a boating accident. An English poet who would end up living in Italy. This is relatively important to the discussion of the poem. Would end up marrying twice. He married a 16-year-old girl who would eventually commit suicide. And then he would marry Shelley, who would eventually write Frankenstein. Those were dour times in England in those days. The interesting thing about him being in Italy towards the end of his life is that it was published in 1818, but the statue that it is referring to, which is young Memnon, or Ramses II statue, would not arrive in London until 1821. Wikipedia states that it's likely that Shelley has never actually seen the young Memnon statue, which, considering the fact that he had moved to Italy before the statue even arrived in the London British Museum, makes it very highly possible that he had never seen it. So he is very fitting as the I in the poem, that a traveler who had gone to a land that he was not particularly aware of told him about this statue found in the desert. Though it's interesting to consider that it's not exactly like there's nothing around the statue of Ramses II, and that we have learned nothing of his time, of the Egyptian culture of that era. There's still lots that we could learn about the Egyptians, and that have been lost in time. It just more shows his romanticized nature of the event. He focused so much on the statue itself that he doesn't really consider the idea that there was more to be learned, that there's more to be discovered. Though, to be fair, in his case, he wasn't able to look up what the statue looked like on the internet. They didn't have that in the early 19th century, or so Wikipedia tells me. I'd have to check to be sure. Though I suppose I do have one final thought in regards to this poem. What would it have been like if the remaining structures around the statue stayed? Like, the remaining civilization kept going, and there was just this statue there, Just the statue in the middle of a park, maybe, surrounding modern civilization. Would it still have meaning to its people generations later? The idea that there was this leader once, and you would look upon their works in despair. How long does the despair last? How long are the works considered that of his? As you consider any civilization that has gone through tumultuous change, whether it be for like the Greeks, the Romans, the Germans, and pretty much any civilization in Europe that was conquered by the Turkish and the Ottomans and the various German empires. Like, how many of these cultures have found themselves invented and reinvented time and time again, only for their oldest pieces of history to remain with them from one government to the next? What would that statue look like if civilization maintained itself? If there was something rather than nothing? Like, would it still have the same meaning to its inhabitants, or would it essentially become like the Colosseum in Rome, a historical novelty, unused except for low-priced tours available online or in person? Got any thoughts in regards to Ozymandias? Let me know in the comments below. Got any suggestions for a 19th century poem or piece of fiction to look at next? Might as well mention that too. Have yourself a nice day, and thank you for listening.